We were talking about carbon dioxide being an acid, and our body has to buffer for that. We want to always stay in the middle. Carbon dioxide is our acid, and we want to buffer for that. So we have two systems. We have the respiratory. If we have too much, we're just going to blow it off, and we're going to go back up to normal. If our pH is getting too high and we're basic, we're going to hold on to it. We're going to hold on to CO2 and drive it back to normal. So we're talking about that buffering when we left off, and we'll look at that acid-base lab after the next test. If it's not a respiratory thing, dealing with CO2, it's going to be everything else, and that's bicarbonate, and that's the kidneys that are going to control that. So we're always shifting back and forth. It's a fluid thing. Thank you. It's a fluid thing. We're always shifting back and forth between carbonic acid. Do we need to hold on to CO2, or do we need to push it off? So which direction are we going? All right, slide 57. So who's going to control if we need to speed up respiration or slow it down? If we're getting too acidic, we got to blow off some carbon dioxide. So who's going to tell us to do that? And that's the medulla and the pons. They're responsible for respiration. So down in our brainstem, the pons and the medulla are going to regulate respiration. So the medulla says breathe in and out. That's its job. It sets the rhythm of breathing in and breathing out. Sets the pace. Breathe in, breathe out. And then the pons is the one that says how fast are we going to breathe in and out. So it sets the rate. The medulla sets the rhythm. The pons sets the rate. So if we're getting too acidic, the pons, we have our chemoreceptors, and they're going to be like, warning, 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 we're getting out of balance. pH is wrong. Chemoreceptors are kicking in. And then it says too acidy, and the lungs say, oh, well, we can handle that. We'll just blow off some carbon dioxide, and we'll bring you back up to neutral again. So that's the pons, where the medulla is already working. It's breathing in and breathing out. And the pons says, let's increase respiration and push off some CO2. Or if we're too basic, we don't have enough, and the pons says, oh, okay, let's take some slow, steady breaths. Let's accumulate CO2, and we'll drive you back to neutral again. So it's the pons that says speed it up or slow it down. It's the medulla that says breathe in and breathe out. So rates of respiration and the rhythm. Of course, we know we have to have the diaphragm working and the internal or the external intercostals to do the up and down breathing that we have and the in and out breathing that we have. But it's the medulla and the pons that sets the rate and the rhythm. So the medulla sets the rhythm. Inspiration about 2 seconds. Expiration a second longer, 3 seconds. So it's a reciprocal inhibition thing. We can't just keep taking in a big breath all the time. The body says, oh, stretch receptors come into play. Those baroreceptors say, whoop, you've expanded, now you need to decrease. You go back out. And then they're deflated, there's, oh, expand again, and then they go back out. So that's the stretch receptors in the lungs saying, what do we need to do here? Those are our baroreceptors. And then the chemoreceptors are monitoring what's going on with the O2. And the medulla and the pons help with that, the rate and the depth of breathing. That make sense? So what happens with hyperventilation? We get, we're excited, or we're crying, and the person's like, and then, you're like, what? What are you saying? So we get into that hyperventilation. We're breathing too quickly, and we get lightheaded. We're going to feel dizzy. They might pass out. So in that situation, we're going to increase the rate and the depth of respiration. So we're huffing, 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 huffing. So we're blowing off too much carbon dioxide because we're working really hard. We're breathing, 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 breathing. So we're getting lightheaded because our chemistry is out of balance again. And we're getting in the basic range because we're blowing off too much. So what are we going to do? We're going to calm down. It's going to be okay. Take a deep breath, and we breathe into a paper bag, right?
Yeah, so that's
So
why people do that?
Yeah, that's why you do that. So how many of us are carrying paper bags around with us? I don't know, I guess they still make them. But that's what you're trying to do, is recapture the carbon dioxide and breathe it back in. So you're trying to recover CO2, and then you're gonna shift that pH back down to neutral again. So when you get lightheaded like that, in this situation, you're getting too basic, and you gotta bring it back to neutral. How we're gonna do that is we're gonna hold on to an acid and bring it back down, and the acid is CO2. So we're gonna take deep breaths, we're gonna breathe into the bag, or you're gonna put a respirator on them, and you're gonna breathe for them if they can't do it. You can, just like pull up your shirt, breathe into your shirt, because hopefully we're all wearing a shirt. We might not have a paper bag, but we probably have a shirt, or if you have a hoodie, you can pull your hoodie down. So this is why you put your head down between your legs. You're trying to just keep that circulation coming back in. So that's what's the story behind hyperventilation. So there's our receptors. We have our chemoreceptors, again, in the arch of the aorta and in our carotid arteries. We're monitoring our O2s, our CO2s, our pH levels. And they're going to be sensitive to also what's going on with that little hydrogen ion out there, because that can shift our pH greatly. That's the main thing that we're talking about. So they're going to be sensitive to that, and it's controlled through the medulla, inspire, expire, and then the pons increase the ethers. So we're going to monitor that through the lungs. Any questions over that? Stretch receptors in the lungs. If we get irritants in there, the lungs have receptors that respond to the irritant, whatever that might be. Maybe you're baking and you get powdered sugar in. You guys ever done that?
Oh, yeah.
And you feel like it takes forever to recover. That cinnamon thing on YouTube now, they try to eat a teaspoon of cinnamon or however much cinnamon, it's an irritant. And the lungs say, no, we can't have that. It's a fine powder, and the lungs don't want that coming down. So you're going to cough or sneeze to get that out, whatever the irritant might be. It might be mucus, so you're coughing and coughing to get that thickness out. Dust, debris, you're cleaning, whatever, you start coughing, it's that dust that's getting in there. Smoke, fumes, whatever it might be. So in addition to that, we have our stretch receptors. They're innervated by the vagus nerve. Remember, the vagus nerve is cranial nerve 10. It's the vagabond. It's the only one that wanders out of the head. That's our vagus nerve. And it innervates, and it says, talks to the lungs. And if we take in a big breath, it's going to respond to that. It says, we don't want you to overinflate, so breathe back out. So the vagus nerve talks to the lungs, and it's monitoring that whole inflammation, overstretching situation as well. So what happens with respiratory adjustments? We talked about with blood vessels. If we're exercising, we're going to divert blood from other areas that don't need it, and we're going to deliver to the skeletal muscle. So we have the same thing with our lungs. The muscles are going to consume huge amounts of oxygen. So we're talking about skeletal muscle. We know it's a big consumer of O2. And if we're consuming a lot of oxygen, we're producing a lot of CO2. So we're going to increase our ventilation to accommodate for that. And it's going to increase 10 to 20-fold to respond to that. So we're going to start breathing much heavier so that we can get more oxygen out to the tissues, and that's a normal response. If we're in a high altitude situation, there's less oxygen. Remember we talked about this with blood doping? So if we're in high altitudes, there's less oxygen, but we still need to breathe just the same. And if we're a visitor, we're going to be winded. There's not as much oxygen available. If you live there over a long period of time, your body says, this is not changing, there's not enough oxygen, we need more oxygen, and it's not going to happen in the atmosphere. So how do we get more oxygen? We make more, what kind of cells? Red blood cells. So erythropoietin comes on board, secretes the hormone. The kidneys secrete erythropoietin. The hormone comes on board, and that stimulates more red blood cell production. If we have, bless you, more red blood cells, we can carry more O2. So if we're just visiting, we're just going to, deal with the situation. If we're staying there for a long time, we're going to acclimatization and then the body's gonna start making more red blood cells. It says, okay, this is a long-term thing, we're gonna have to get more oxygen, and we're gonna make red blood cells to do that. So that's acclimatization. And this is why athletes will move to their area like 3-4 months ahead of time if they're doing Olympics or special sports like that. They'll get there, or they'll go somewhere and train in a high altitude center, and they'll go and train in that climate so that their body starts making more red blood cells so that they're ready for it. Because we talked about that being a huge advantage with your endurance sports, but even as short sports, it's still going to be an advantage because you need to have lots of oxygen to feed the muscles. So acclimation is what that's all about. Yes?
On going back to the irritant and stretch receptors, and people that have with black lung disease or even smog
Right.
infested area, how does the lung adjust to that constant irritation?
Yeah, it's constantly irritated, so you're constantly coughing or sneezing or whatever, and it's just causing inflammation and irritation, and it's just a chronic inflammatory thing.
In the long term, it's just going to get worse and worse.
Right. Yeah, because the body can only do as much as it can do. That's your protective mechanism, but it's going to stay irritated. So, yeah. And then what white blood cell is going to come on board? Monocytes are going to come on board long term. Histamine is going to be an issue. So our basophils are going to be elevated. So when we're looking at blood cells, we're going to be like, okay, well, what's going on here? If we see basophils in there, we know that chronic inflammation, histamines, irritation, all the time. We'll see there. And if it goes on, your monocytes are going to go up as well. Because they're going to try to go around and defend and destroy all that stuff. So that's what you'll see in your blood work situation. Okay, and then talking about problems, we have our COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It's irreversible decrease in the ability to force air out of our lungs. It's the leading cause of death in the U.S. 80% of COPD cases are obviously smokers. And then they're going to suffer from dyspnea. Remember, eupnea is normal breathing. Dyspnea is labored breathing, difficult breathing. They're having a hard time moving air. So they have some kind of obstruction in there. How we're going to treat it? We get our inhalers on board, and we're going to bronchodilate and try to open up that airway. It's an inflammatory thing, like we were just talking about, so we're going to get some steroids on board. That's what our vasodilators are. We get some steroids on board, and you use your inhaler. And then go back to eupnea and get out of dyspnea. COPD. And then we talk about different types. Emphysema. Emphysema are called pink puffers. So what happens here, this was the one where the alveoli are damaged over time. Remember, we have our cluster of grapes, and then we'll start rupturing those alveoli, so they're permanently damaged. It causes destruction to the walls of the alveoli. And so that was our picture where we had lots and lots of alveoli, normal healthy lungs. And then in emphysema, we start doing damage to those, and then we lose so much surface area that we don't have good gas exchange in there. So this person has to work really hard to exchange gas, and what they start to do is they start breathing like this. So they're short, shallow breathers. And when you're doing that, because you're not getting air, so you can't do normal breathing, so they're trying to increase that ability to exchange air. And they increase their workload by about 15 to 20%. And so these people lose weight because they're exercising. And this is their exercise. They're breathing. Like if we go up and down stairs, we increase our breathing, right? So they're going to be thin people because they're working really hard. They're doing a cardio exercise by doing that. They're increasing their breathing, and they're going to lose weight. And they come in, they're very pink because they're huffing all the time, and they're going to be a thin person. So my sister has this. She is as skinny as can be now. She is like, she's much taller than me. She might be 5'8", 5'9", maybe. And I bet maybe now she weighs 100 pounds. She is so thin. And I see her and I'm like, oh, Every time I see her, I'm like, you do not look good. But she smoked since high school, and she's still smoking away. And people see us and they're like, oh my gosh, that's your sister. They're like, you look nothing alike. We always were mistaken for twins our whole life. Up until probably like the last 15 years maybe. And they're like, wow, well, how much older is she? She's 2 years older than me. They're like, oh, we thought she was 60 something. So she looks like it. So it's really taking a toll on her. It's sad to see. But she's like the incredible shrinking woman now. Then we have the opposite of emphysema. We have bronchitis. In bronchitis, these people are puffy. And so we call them blue bloaters. Emphysema are pink puffers. Bronchitis are blue bloaters. Because when you have bronchitis, what do you have? Congestion, a lot of mucus. And remember that layer here is tissue paper thin. And then we get a lot of mucus in there, and we've made that layer that much thicker. So oxygen is trying to get out, and carbon dioxide is trying to get in and up and out. So we've increased that distance, and gas exchange isn't very good. So these people are going to be blue because they're having poor oxygen in their system. So they're blue bloaters. They get very barrel chested, they get heavy looking. So pink puffers, emphysema, because they're working hard. They're puffing all the time. And blue bloaters, blue because they're having lack of oxygen, and then they get all bloating. So both of those fall under the category of COPDs. Is it a restriction, emphysema, or is it an obstruction? The mucus is obstructing in bronchitis, so decreasing gas exchange. And then in that category, asthma falls in the category of COPDs, but asthma is reversible, hopefully. So it is under the category of obstructive diseases, but what's obstructed is your airway, and it's being vasoconstricted for whatever reason that's irritating it. But we can give you a medication and we can bronchodilate. So asthma falls under that category, but it's not like a true one because it is reversible. We give you your inhaler and we reverse it. So whatever causes your bronchospasms, it might be exercise, it might be an allergen, it might be the cold weather, and then your airway, your bronchioles are open, and then it gets constricted, and then we can't move air. So then we get into a vasoconstriction, which is obstruction. Then we get your inhalers back on board, or we give you an EpiPen, and we vasodilate, and air flows again. So it falls under that category, but it's not, it is the one that is reversible. The other two are not reversible. You can stop smoking with emphysema, the damage is done, you're not going to repair your alveoli. With bronchitis, if you stop smoking, you're going to have less of that, so that is more reversible, but the damage that you've done is still there, but you're going to not cause further inflammation. So there's your scary lecture for all the smokers out there. This is not meant to scare you, it's meant to educate you.
If you have a lung transplant, does that take care of COPD?
It would on that side. Yeah, that lung would be healthier because you're probably not going to get a double one. At one point maybe you would, but it's usually one lung that they do it. So then you have one good healthy lung. That would fix it. As long as you don't go back to doing what you were doing. If you could get a lung transplant.
Those are few and far between.
Yeah, they are very few and far between. The liver is pretty remarkable. The liver can go down to, it can lose 80% function before it's causing problems. So only 20% can be functioning before you get into trouble with the liver. It's not going to be working great, but no other organ in our body can go down to 20% and it's still going to be functioning and working. You're still going to have issues, but you're not going to have major things until you get really low in the liver. And the liver can regenerate itself if it has the opportunity, but the lungs, they can't. TB is another one that falls under this category with lung diseases, but this is an infected bacteria, so you guys have all had your TB tests where you go and you do the scratch test. That's what we're testing for. It's the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and it's very contagious. It's spread by coughing. It's just like a cold, but it's a bacteria that we're spreading. Especially in crowded populations. So we get worried about colleges, we get worried about prisons, anywhere where there's a lot of condensed people in a room. and it's easily spreadable. About a third of the population is infected with TB. What was I listening to the other day? I just heard this yesterday on the news somewhere, and it did say did somebody hear it?
Yes,
What was that on?
I think the person was from India, and she went to, Chicago.
Oh, she got on the plane,
Mhm.
and then she went to like Tennessee,
She went
and
to Chicago, Tennessee.
Chicago and Tennessee. And so they were like, we need to find out her flight and see who was on her flight, and especially in her row because it's bacterial. So you can cough and it'll get on those people. But 1 in 3 people has TB. And so now they're really worried about that, this lady, because she came over and she's positive for TB. But 1 in 3 people has it. It lives in our system. It says dormant. It's kind of like contained in our lungs, and it lives in there. And until our immune system gets compromised, we don't know about it. So a lot of us are positive, but we don't even know it. And that's why all healthcare workers get a TB test so that you can tell if you are or not. Because 1 in 3 of us has it. So 1 of you 3, 1 of you 3, 1 of you 3. So you're like, wow, that's a lot of people. And it lies dormant, and as long as your immune's strong, then we're fine. It's just like chickenpox and shingles. We've all had the herpes virus in our system if we've had chickenpox, and it lies dormant, and it doesn't come back out as shingles unless our immune gets compromised, and then it can come back out. So it's the same kind of story. Yes.
So is it a good idea to give the BCG to infants? Like in my country, when a baby is born, they give the baby, I think it's the tuberculosis, is it a virus?
Vaccine.
Vaccine, yeah, I
Vaccine,
give them
right.
the BCG. So like me, anytime I give them one test, I test positive. But they said it's something like just to give you immunity, like you build immunity against the TB vaccine.
Right, right. So the whole idea behind vaccine is they give you the shot, they inject you with whatever the agent is, and then your body is going to make antibodies against it so that you can fight it off.
Yeah, so anytime I always test positive to the TB test.
Right.
So all I have to do is just fill out some paperwork, go for a chest X-ray. It's negative before I can get any result.
Right, yeah. So you're safe as long as your immune's good, you're not having any symptoms of it, everybody else is just fine. You're not an active carrier of it, you have it dormant in your system, but a lot of people have that. And so that's why we do the test, because then they test it. If you're positive, then they know you are, and they know at what point did you get it. But if you don't have any symptoms of it, you're fine and you're not a risk of it.
So is the BCG really helpful?
Yeah, so that's the big question. And that's what they were saying was, the vaccine is pretty ineffective, and they were saying we need a new vaccine, something that's going to be more effective, but, I don't know how helpful it's going to be. Because if 1 in 3 of us have it, how effective is it?
So in that woman that came over from India, she obviously had to have.
Yeah, so she had active signs, and she was coughing and hacking.
But before she came here, she would have had that.
Or not necessarily.
Before you come to the United States, you don't have to have a TB test. But it must have changed because when I came here, they did.
Oh, did they?
Oh, yeah.
It might be, I don't know, I think different, well, I don't know if that's a US thing coming into the US if they require it.
When I came here, I had to have a TB test, and obviously I was positive.
Yeah,
But then they took another test and they said no.
okay.
So I was.
It might be a regulation, I don't know, just when you're, well, I'm trying to think. Where was that traveling? It might be a requirement now. Yeah, it might be. So,
I think it is, because before I came here, I had a chest X-ray, like they tested for hepatitis,
Yeah.
HIV, and all those kinds of stuff.
right, yeah, I think you're right, now that you say that, because I'm thinking back to when my son was going to Europe for the summer, he had to have a bunch of tests.
Yeah, but
And he didn't have all his vaccines, so I was like, oh, well, this will be a good test to see what he has and what he doesn't have. And he was pre-me, so I'm like, no, you're not getting anything till your immune's ready. And then there's certain things I picked and certain things I didn't pick. And he was healthy as a horse and all of that. But if you go on like mission trips, a lot of times when you leave the country, you have to get your TB vaccine. You gotta get malaria, all kinds of things you have to get. So yeah, that probably is true now that I think about that. But so many people have it. But, and then, like you said, they take a chest x-ray, you can see the nodules in there, but they're contained. And as long as you don't have active signs and symptoms of it. So a third of the world has it, they're in our immune system, calcified in the lungs. And then as long as you don't have these signs and symptoms, then you're not contagious, you're fine. It's contained and it's dormant in your system. And so the signs of that are just this racking cough. Like think of the worst bronchitis, cold you've ever had, and it's that plus some. So it's pretty noticeable. The other thing you have is night sweats like crazy. Well, bless you, if you're in menopause, well, oh my goodness, as long as you're not coughing, you're like, okay, it's probably not TB. So night sweats and fever are a big thing, and then you're losing weight because your body is working, bless you, because your body's working really hard to fight off that bacteria. So you're, again, it's like the emphysema person, your body's working metabolically, it's working really hard so that person will lose weight. And they used to put patients in sanatoriums back in the day. So did you guys ever see any of the Doc Holliday movies, Tombstone, like the best movie ever?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great movie. Love that. So Doc Holliday had it and they cough up blood. So we see this in the Western movies where they're coughing and then the blood is coming up, that's TB that they have. So pretty noticeable symptoms. So next time you get a bad cough, don't worry, it's probably not TB. Unless you start getting the night sweats and coughing up blood, then you know. So they would put these patients away in sanatoriums to die because they didn't want to contaminate the population, and then off they would go, and they would just live there with all the other patients. And so now we can easily treat it with antibiotics, but you get on a 12-month, you get on a 1-year program of antibiotics. Back then they didn't have antibiotics, so they just sent them off to the sanatorium, and then they would just live there with all their fellow cootie people.
Doc Holliday, he had it, so he lived amongst all those people.
Yeah.
How come they didn't get it?
And then you spread it, eventually people did. Some either you do or you don't, so it's just like a cold. Some of you might get it, some of you might not get it. Yeah.
He said, I'll be-
But that's how, I'll be your huckleberry. You guys gotta watch it, if you haven't seen it, you gotta watch Tombstone. And then I think there was another one, maybe Kevin Costner did a version of it, but Tombstone is one. It's got Sam Elliott in it.
It was one of my heart.
And yeah, White Earth, that was it, that's it. So Sam Elliott's in it, Kurt Russell's in it, it's just great.
Val Kilmer.
Val Kilmer plays Doc Holliday.
So there's a series right now that they have all the old time in there, you know, like Doc Holliday, and it's really interesting.
It is interesting.
They highlighted on one specific person, you know, it's called It's Alive. So,
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it's, it had him as a featured person, and it showed, he was young, he was very young.
Yeah.
About it.
And they were all young.
Yeah.
And people didn't live much past their 30s back then because they had no antibiotics and they
He
had all
was a
these
dentist,
diseases.
right?
I think he was, yeah, he started as a dentist. And they were breathing all those fumes. Yeah. So today, if you test positive and you start showing signs, they'll put you on a 12-month antibiotic regimen. You can't drink alcohol because that kind of weakens the immune system. So when you're on that, no alcohol for at least 6 months. It might be the whole year, I'm not sure, but you'll get on that 12-month period. So all healthcare workers are always tested because you're going to be exposed to that. And you might become positive. I have a lot of friends, and two of you already know that you're positive. I have a lot of friends that are positive from being healthcare workers, but they don't have any symptoms of it. And I have one friend that did go on the antibiotic treatment. He tested positive when he was in doing rounds in medical school. So, and he's just fine. And then the last one is cystic fibrosis. And this is a genetic disease. So this one, you're born with it. And you have that excessive mucus, and it just is very, very active. And again, it's the same situation, just like bronchitis. It makes that barrier for gas exchange very thick, so it's hard to breathe. And then you have have all this mucus in there, and it's a dark, moist environment, so it's a breeding ground for infection. So these people, like, we get a bad case of bronchitis, we get on antibiotics, we get over it. But for these people, they just keep secreting and secreting and secreting, so they can't ever get ahead of it. It's very hard to get ahead of it, and then it gets infected, and then their immune gets weaker, and it's just this really bad cycle. So the bacteria releases the toxins, we get the whole inflammatory thing going on, it forms scar tissue in the lung, it's just a bad situation. I don't think you can read that down there. So we treat it with the antibiotics, obviously, if you get a bacterial infection going on. We can do the cupping or clapping where you're doing the percussion on their back, and that's just to move the mucus. And then one of the things, that they found is a hypertonic solution. Because remember hypertonic solutions? You remember what happens in that situation? Is fluid comes out and cells shrink. So they found a really simple solution is just to give them saline and make cells shrink, and then they can't make as much mucus. So that's a really easy solution. It's not a cure, it's not a fix, it's there. It's just a treatment that sometimes is helpful. But what you'll see is when it's usually diagnosed in early childhood, and then that kid often stays home because their immune is so low that they can't be out, especially during cold and flu season, is they'll just stay home during that time in homeschool because they can't afford to be exposed to all that. Whereas we can, we might get it, we fight it off in a day or two, or maybe you get a bad case for a week or a month, and then you recover. With them, it's just too much of a challenge. So they'll be home for quite a long period of time. And they'll live until, depending on complications, they can easily live until 20s and 30s, even beyond, just depending. So it's a genetic situation.
I learned in my OB orientation reading that there's predicting now that children born now with cystic fibrosis will live until their 40s and 50s.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. But it's
Still a bad diagnosis.
super intensive. We don't want to scare you.
Yeah, it's a bad thing. Boomer Sison's son had it here locally for the Bengals. So they're, know your anatomy, starting on page 802. Respiratory. So it talks about, on 802 we talk about moving air, we call that pulmonary ventilation. We inspire, we expire, the lungs, these are functions of the lungs, pulmonary ventilation. And then, of course, transporting of gases. I want that to happen. And know your anatomy on page 804. We're going to breathe in through the nostrils, and we have the whole nasal cavity. We have the compass, we'll look at that in lab. Then we go down the back, and that's our throat, called our pharynx. Depending on where we are in the pharynx, if we're behind the nose, nasopharynx, behind the mouth, oropharynx, or behind the larynx, the laryngeal pharynx. So we breathe in air through the nose, we breathe in through the mouth. We have